Some people do not comfort your pain. They memorize it. Caleb Whitmore learned this in a room where nothing loud happened. No argument. No raised voice. No dramatic scene. Just one sentence, spoken calmly across a polished table while rain moved down the office windows behind him. It was a sentence no stranger could have known how to use. Too specific. Too clean. Too close to something he had once explained in confidence. And the moment he heard it, his body reacted before his mind could protect him. His hand tightened slightly against the edge of the table. His breathing changed. His face stayed still, but not quickly enough. The person across from him saw it. That was the problem. They were not trying to win the conversation with logic. They were watching for movement. A pause. A blink. A flicker in the eyes. The smallest proof that they had touched the correct place. Caleb understood then that the sentence was not powerful because it was clever. It was powerful because he had once handed them the map. Months earlier, he had called it honesty. He had called it trust. He had sat with someone who seemed patient, warm, and safe, and he had explained the old thing that still followed him. The fear of being dismissed. The humiliation of being overlooked. The quiet anger of being treated like someone useful but not important. He said it because the room felt gentle. He said it because the other person nodded at the right moments. He said it because being understood felt, for a few minutes, like being protected. That was his mistake. Understanding is not protection. Attention is not loyalty. A soft voice is not proof of a clean motive. Some people listen because they care. Some people listen because information gives them position. And if you cannot tell the difference, your pain becomes public property in private hands. Caleb had always believed that sharing what hurt him made him more human. And with the right person, maybe it could have. But with the wrong person, pain becomes instruction. It tells them what makes you defensive. What makes you chase approval? What makes you explain yourself longer than you should? What makes you lose your composure while trying to look calm? Pain is not just emotion. It is data. It reveals the places where your self-control is weakest and where your need to be seen correctly is strongest. The world will tell you to open up. It will say vulnerability is strength. It will praise you for being real. But the world rarely asks who is sitting across from you when you do it. Caleb sat there in that office, listening to his own private wound return in another person's mouth, and realized the most dangerous listener is not always the one who judges you immediately. It is the one who remembers quietly. The one who stores details without revealing why. The one who studies your reactions while pretending to study your words. From that moment, Caleb knew the lesson had arrived too late, but not uselessly. He could not take back what he had revealed. He could not erase what they now understood. But he could stop giving them more. He could stop treating every gentle question as an invitation. He could stop mistaking emotional relief for safety. And he could learn the rule that private men understand before the world gets close enough to move them. Your pain should not be offered to everyone who knows how to sound kind. It should be guarded until loyalty has been proven under pressure. Pain does not only tell people what happened to you. It tells them how to move you. Caleb Whitmore understood this after the meeting ended, when the office emptied and the rain outside turned the glass walls into dark mirrors. He stayed seated longer than everyone else, replaying the sentence in his mind, not because it was harsh, but because it had been perfectly placed. That was what disturbed him. It touched the exact old place and waited for his reaction. It did not need to accuse him. It only needed to remind him. Shame is a map. Fear is a map. The need for approval is a map. The fear of being abandoned is a map. When someone knows which one lives inside you, they do not need to understand your whole life. They only need to know which road leads to your reaction. Most people think pain is private because it happened in the past. That is childish. Pain is active if it still controls your present. If one sentence can make you explain too much, the wound is active. If one silence can make you chase someone who has not earned you, the wound is active. If one cold look can make you abandon your own standard just to feel accepted again, the wound is active. And active wounds are not memories. They are access points. Caleb had never thought of himself this way. He thought he had overcome most of it because he had learned to function. He worked. He dressed well. He spoke calmly. He paid his bills. He appeared stable in rooms where other people looked nervous. But composure on the surface is not the same as control underneath. A man can look composed and still be governed by a single hidden fear. Caleb's hidden fear was not failure. It was being made invisible. He hated being overlooked more than he admitted. He hated being useful but not respected. He hated being needed but not valued. And the person across the table had learned this. Not in one conversation. Through pieces. Through small admissions. Through moments when Caleb thought he was simply being honest. He had said once that being ignored bothered him more than criticism. He had said once that he could handle pressure, but not being treated like he did not matter. He had said once that he had spent years proving himself to people who only noticed him when something was needed. At the time, those sentences felt harmless. They felt human. But together, they built a map. And once the map existed, someone could choose the road. This is why pain must be treated with more discipline than success. Success makes people envy you. Pain helps them manage you. If they know you fear abandonment, they can withdraw warmth and watch you reach. If they know you fear disrespect, they can question your value in a crowded room and watch you defend. If they know you fear being misunderstood, they can misread you on purpose and watch you explain. If they know you fear not being chosen, they can offer approval in small doses and make you compete for the next one. They do not need to be brilliant. They only need to be observant. The ordinary person listens to your pain and feels something. The dangerous person listens and learns where the buttons are. Caleb stood from the table and looked at his reflection in the dark glass. The city behind him was only blurred light and rain, but his own face was clear enough to make him uncomfortable. He saw a man who had mistaken emotional exposure for strength because people praised it when it benefited them. They called him open. They called him honest. They said they appreciated how real he was. Of course they appreciated it. A readable man is convenient. He saves others the trouble of earning depth. He gives them the instructions himself. This does not mean you should never trust anyone. That is paranoia, and paranoia is not power. Power is ranking access. Power is understanding that not every listener deserves the same room inside you. Some people can know the facts. Very few should know the wound. Facts tell people what occurred. Wounds tell people what still governs you. That difference is everything. Caleb wrote it down later that night in a small black notebook he kept in his apartment study. Do not give people the map of your reactions. He stared at the sentence for a long time because it sounded colder than he used to be. But it was not cold. It was accurate. A boundary always sounds cold to the person who preferred you unguarded. And Caleb was beginning to understand that if he did not protect the map, someone else would use it to guide him into reactions that no longer belonged to him. The next morning, Caleb Whitmore began noticing the difference between people who listen and people who study. It was not obvious before. That is why it had worked on him. The dangerous listener does not look dangerous. They do not interrupt too much. They do not rush. They do not make you feel judged in the beginning. They give you space, but the space is not always generosity. Sometimes it is a trap with comfortable furniture. Caleb remembered the first time he should have known. It had been weeks earlier, in a quiet bar with dark wood walls, low amber lights, and rain pressing softly against the windows. The person across from him had asked about his past with the kind of patience that makes a man lower his guard. They did not ask everything at once. That would have been too crude. They asked one careful question, then waited. They let the silence do half the work. When Caleb answered lightly, they followed the thread. When his voice changed, they noticed. When he looked away for a second, they marked it. That is the first sign of someone who studies you. They are less interested in your words than in the reaction behind your words. A normal person hears a story. A student of control watches the face telling it. They notice where you pause. They notice what you laugh off too quickly. They notice the name you avoid. They notice the topic that makes your posture shift by 1 inch. Caleb had confused this attention with intimacy. He thought, finally, someone is listening. But being watched closely is not the same as being cared for. A camera also watches closely. A judge also watches closely. A rival also watches closely. Attention only becomes safe when it is joined to restraint. Without restraint, attention becomes surveillance with a smile. The second sign is repetition disguised as curiosity. People who study you return to the same wound from different angles. They do not say, "Tell me where you are weakest." They ask, "What bothered you most about that?" Then later, they ask, "Why do you think that still affects you?" Then another day, they ask, "Do you always react that way when people overlook you?" Different words. Same door. They are checking whether the handle still opens. Caleb had seen this pattern and ignored it because every question came wrapped in concern. That is how they pass through your defenses. Concern makes a question look moral. It makes your refusal look cold. It makes your privacy look like distrust. But care does not need to keep circling the same injury. Care does not need to test the bruise to prove it exists. Care protects what it has already learned. Curiosity keeps digging. The third sign is memory without loyalty. This is the one that exposes them. They remember details you barely remember saying, but they do not use that memory to protect you. They use it to position themselves closer to your center. They bring up old statements at strange times. They quote your fears with a soft voice. They remind you what you once admitted when they want you to behave a certain way. Caleb had once told that person he hated feeling invisible in important rooms. Weeks later, when he resisted a decision, they said, maybe this is just touching that old feeling of being overlooked. Calm voice, polite face, but the function was control. They were not discussing the decision anymore. They were reducing his judgment to a wound. That is a dangerous move. When someone can turn your perspective into a symptom, they do not have to answer your point. They only have to diagnose you. Caleb saw it now with cold clarity. The person who studies you does not need to call you wrong. They can call you hurt. They can call you sensitive. They can call you triggered. They can make your pain explain away your intelligence. This is why you must never confuse emotional vocabulary with wisdom. Some people learn the language of healing so they can sound safe while taking control of the frame. They say things like, I am just trying to understand where this is coming from. But listen carefully. Sometimes they are not trying to understand your position. They are trying to relocate it inside your weakness. Once they do that, your argument becomes less serious. Your boundary becomes a reaction. Your standard becomes a defense mechanism. Your refusal becomes proof that they were right about you. That afternoon, Caleb sat in his apartment study with the black notebook open and wrote another rule beneath the first. The people who study you will always know how to sound concerned while moving closer to your controls. He did not write it with anger. Anger would have made the lesson smaller. He wrote it like a law. Then he remembered the bar again, the low lights, the patient eyes, the careful questions, the way he had felt relieved to be heard. That relief was the bait. Not because connection is false, but because relief makes people careless. The man who has carried pain alone for too long can mistake any open chair for a sanctuary. Caleb had done that. He had sat down across from someone who listened beautifully and failed to ask the only question that mattered. Has this person ever protected anything fragile when there was nothing to gain from protecting it? That is the test. Not warmth. Not attention. Not patience. Protection. Until you see that, give facts. Give courtesy. Give distance. But do not give the wound. Because the person who studies you is not always trying to know you deeply. Sometimes they are only trying to know where the door is weakest. That evening, Caleb Whitmore stopped blaming the person who had studied him long enough to ask why he had allowed it. That question was harder. It removed the comfort of seeing himself only as the victim of someone else's curiosity. He sat in his apartment study with the black notebook open, the city humming behind the rain-dark windows, and finally admitted the part he had avoided. He had not revealed his pain because trust had been proven. He revealed it because loneliness had made him impatient. That is the truth most people do not want to hear. They say they opened up because the other person felt safe. Sometimes that is true, but often, they opened up because carrying the wound alone had become exhausting. They wanted relief. They wanted a witness. They wanted someone to look at the hidden part of them and say, I understand, you are not wrong. You are not invisible. You are not alone. And that need is exactly where judgment begins to weaken. Caleb remembered the night at the quiet bar with low amber lights and old wood walls. He remembered how long it had been since anyone had asked him something that sounded patient. He remembered the empty chair across from him becoming, in his mind, a kind of sanctuary. The person had not earned that role. Caleb had assigned it because he was tired. That was the danger. When a man is tired enough, he will mistake warmth for loyalty. He will mistake attention for character. He will mistake a calm listener for a safe keeper of his private world. He does not ask whether they deserve the truth. He only asks whether saying it will make the pressure leave his chest. And for a few minutes, it does. That is why the trade feels worth it in the moment. Confession gives temporary relief. Privacy requires endurance. Most people choose relief, then act surprised when relief becomes a debt. Caleb had done exactly that. He had paid for a few minutes of feeling understood with information that stayed outside him forever. That is the cruel exchange. Pain leaves your mouth, but it does not disappear. It enters someone else's memory. And once it lives there, You no longer fully control when it returns. This is why vulnerability without discernment is not courage. It is hunger. Hunger for comfort. Hunger for recognition. Hunger to be rescued from the private room inside yourself. Caleb stared at his own reflection in the dark window and saw the truth plainly. He had wanted to be rescued. Not dramatically, not in a childish way, but quietly, through understanding. He wanted someone to see the old humiliation and give it a noble name. He wanted someone to tell him that his anger was justified, that his silence had meaning, that the years of being overlooked had not made him small. That desire was human. But human does not always mean safe. The world is full of people who can sense a man looking for emotional rescue. They do not need to be cruel. They only need to be useful at the right moment. They offer the right tone, the right patience, the right silence after your sentence. And suddenly you are giving them parts of yourself they never earned through loyalty, time, or sacrifice. Caleb wrote another line in the notebook. Never confuse relief with trust. He underlined nothing. He did not need to. The sentence was heavy enough. Relief is what you feel after you speak. Trust is what they prove after they know. Relief happens immediately. Trust requires time. Relief is emotional. Trust is behavioral. Relief can be created by anyone with patience and a soft voice. Trust can only be created by someone who protects your name when you are not in the room, protects your silence when curiosity rises, and protects your dignity when your weakness would be easy to use. Caleb had skipped the proof and accepted the feeling. That was his error. Not openness itself. Not honesty itself. The error was speed. He gave depth before he had evidence. He gave pain before he had loyalty. He gave access because solitude had made him reckless. The hardest part of becoming powerful is not learning to suspect everyone. Suspicion is easy. Any wounded person can do that. The harder discipline is learning to sit with your own pain without immediately handing it to the nearest person who sounds kind. To hold it until your mind is clear. To let the urge pass. To ask whether the listener has earned the room you are about to open. Most people fail because the silence feels too heavy. They speak just to feel lighter. Caleb had lived that way for years. But now he understood that some heaviness is protective. Some silence is a gate. Some loneliness is cheaper than the wrong confession. He closed the notebook and sat still for a long time. Not healed, not hardened into emptiness, but more awake. He did not need to become someone without pain. That would be false. He needed to become someone who did not auction his pain for a moment of comfort. Because the person who cannot endure his own loneliness will keep giving strangers the keys to his wounds and calling it connection. The next week taught Caleb Whitmore the most unpleasant part of the lesson. People who collect pain rarely spend it immediately. They save it. That is what makes them difficult to recognize. If someone uses your weakness the day after you reveal it, even a naive man can see the pattern. But the patient observer does not move that fast. They smile the next morning. They answer your messages normally. They sit across from you with the same calm face. They let you believe the confession disappeared into kindness. And because nothing happens right away, you relax. You tell yourself you were wrong to be cautious. You tell yourself the world is not that strategic. You tell yourself they are different. That is how the door stays open. Caleb had lived through that exact delay. After the night at the quiet bar, nothing changed. The person still greeted him warmly, still asked about his day, still made him feel seen in subtle ways. For several weeks, the information slept. It did not return as judgment. It did not return as gossip. It did not return as pressure. It waited. And because it waited, Caleb forgot it was no longer inside him. This is the mistake most people make with private disclosure. They think if their pain is not used quickly, it is safe. No, sometimes it is only stored. Stored information has power because it gives the other person options. They do not need to use it now. They can use it later, when timing gives it more value. When you are asking for more respect. When you are setting a boundary. When you are becoming less available. When you are stepping into a room where they would rather see you smaller. That is when the old wound suddenly becomes relevant. Not because it matters, because it is useful. Caleb saw this during a small leadership discussion where his name came up more than he expected. He had been calm, prepared, measured. He made a point about responsibility and recognition, nothing dramatic, nothing emotional. Then the same person leaned back and said, in that gentle tone that made everything sound reasonable, I wonder if this is connected to Caleb's old sensitivity about being overlooked. The room did not explode. It did not need to. The sentence changed the air. Before that moment, Caleb's point was a point. After that moment, his point became a symptom. His standard became a wound speaking. His judgment became emotional history. That is how stored pain is used by careful people. Not to humiliate you loudly, but to lower the rank of your words. They do not say your argument is wrong. They say it comes from a place. They do not address your boundary. They explain your boundary. They do not answer your standard. They make your standard look like unfinished hurt. And once the room accepts that frame, you are no longer debating the issue. You are defending the legitimacy of your own mind. Caleb felt the old reaction rise. The need to clarify. The need to say, no, that is not what this is. The need to prove he was not being driven by the past. But he had written enough in the notebook to recognize the move. If he rushed to defend himself, he would confirm the frame. If he became visibly bothered, he would feed the diagnosis. If he explained too much, he would show them the button still worked. So he did something colder. He paused. Not because he had nothing to say, because he had too much to protect. Then he answered with one clean sentence. The point stands on its own. No confession, no apology, no emotional cleanup. Just a line drawn between his reasoning and the wound someone tried to attach to it. The room adjusted. Not completely, not instantly, but enough. Because composure breaks the spell. When someone tries to turn your pain into a frame and you refuse to perform the reaction they expected, their control loses elegance. They need your participation. They need the flinch. They need the rush. They need the visible proof that they found the right place. Without it, their comment starts to look less insightful and more intrusive. Caleb understood then that the wound itself was not the real danger. The real danger was the automatic reaction attached to it. Pain becomes control only when it can still pull movement from you. That is why people who study you wait. They are not only waiting for a useful moment. They are waiting to see whether the old reaction is still alive. They bring the memory close and watch. Do you explain? Do you shrink? Do you chase warmth? Do you lose your voice? Do you become desperate to be seen correctly? If yes, they know the wound remains profitable. If no, the old information begins to expire. That evening, Caleb returned to his apartment study and opened the black notebook again. He wrote another rule beneath the others. Old pain loses power when it no longer controls the timing of your reaction. He sat with that sentence until the rain stopped against the window. He did not feel triumphant. Triumph is too loud for this kind of lesson. He felt cleaner, more separate from the version of himself who had paid for comfort with access. He could not erase what had been stored, but he could make it less useful. He could stop giving the old wound fresh movement. He could let the watchers discover that the place they once touched no longer opened the same door. Machiavelli would not have called Caleb Whitmore's problem emotional. He would have called it strategic. That was the line Caleb finally crossed after the week of delayed pressure and careful comments. He stopped asking why someone would use an old wound in a modern room and started asking what the wound allowed them to control. The answer was rhythm. Not his whole life. Not every decision. Not every thought. Just rhythm. The moment he reacted too quickly, they could set the pace. The moment he defended too much, they could set the frame. The moment he needed to be understood, they could set the price. That is the hidden power of knowing where a man hurts. You do not need to own him. You only need to interrupt his timing. Make him speak before he is ready. Make him explain before he has chosen his position. Make him show concern before he has measured the room. A man who loses his rhythm loses his authority. Caleb saw this during a formal evening event 2 days later, held in a private dining room above the city, where the windows were tall, the table was long, and the conversation moved with the quiet ambition of people pretending not to compete. The room looked civilized. Dark suits, low voices, polished glasses, soft laughter. But underneath it, everyone was measuring status. Who spoke first? Who was interrupted? Who received silence after a sentence? Who needed approval? Who could make others wait? Caleb entered with the black notebook's rules already carved into his mind, not as words, but as posture. He had learned something colder than confidence. He had learned delay. Across the room, the same person who had once studied him smiled with the old warmth and asked a question that sounded harmless. Are you comfortable taking the lead on this, considering how personal recognition has been for you in the past? There it was again. Not an insult. Not a direct challenge. Something smoother. A sentence built to pull the old Caleb into the room. If he denied it too strongly, he would look defensive. If he explained it carefully, he would give the room more history. If he smiled awkwardly, he would reveal discomfort. The question was not designed to learn. It was designed to make him move on their rhythm. Caleb felt the first flicker inside him, but this time he did not obey it. He let the silence stretch for 1 second, then 2. Not long enough to be dramatic. Long enough to make it clear he was choosing, not reacting. Then he said, "I am comfortable leading when the work requires leadership." Nothing more. He did not address the wound. He did not correct the implication. He did not ask to be seen fairly. He returned the room to the work. That was the Machiavellian move. Not cruelty. Not performance. Control of timing. When someone tries to pull you into pain, you do not follow them there. You decide where the conversation lives. Most people think power means having the strongest answer. It does not. Power often means refusing the wrong battlefield. If they bring you into your wound, they already know the terrain better than you think. They know the emotional rocks, the old shadows, the places where you stumble. So you do not fight there. You move the discussion to principle, structure, outcome, responsibility, timing, value. The wound is private terrain. Do not host public arguments there. Caleb looked around the table and understood why the old masters cared so much about composure. Composure is not looking calm. Anyone can look calm for a photograph. Composure is keeping ownership of your sequence. What you notice first. What you answer second. What you refuse to answer at all. Where your eyes go. How fast your voice comes out. Whether your body announces injury before your mind has decided what to reveal. People who study you are not always searching for secrets. Sometimes they are searching for sequence. They want to know the order of your collapse. First you go quiet. Then you explain. Then you seek reassurance. Then you soften your boundary. Then you return to needing their approval. That sequence is a machine. Once they know it, they can start it whenever they want. Caleb's work was to break the machine. Not by pretending the old pain did not exist, but by refusing to let it command the next move. This is the law. The person who can predict your reaction can prepare the room before you enter it. The person who can trigger your explanation can make you sound guilty before you are accused. The person who can touch your insecurity can make your strongest point look like a personal issue. The person who can make you chase recognition can make you compete for permission you never needed. Caleb had lived under that law without naming it. Now he named it, and naming it made him colder in the right way. After the dinner, as the city lights blurred through the high windows, he stepped away from the table and watched the others continue their elegant games. For the first time, he did not feel outside the room. He felt above the motion inside it. He could see the rhythm. Who pressed? Who flinched? Who performed ease? Who waited for approval? Who collected reactions like coins? And he saw himself differently too. Not healed. Not untouchable. But no longer automatic. That was enough. A man does not become powerful by having no wounds. He becomes powerful when his wounds no longer answer for him. Caleb understood that control was not the absence of pain. It was the discipline to let pain remain silent while judgment speaks. The morning after the formal dinner, Caleb Whitmore stopped treating restraint as a mood and turned it into a system. Mood fades. Systems remain when the room becomes warm, when the question sounds gentle, when the loneliness returns, when someone looks at you with patient eyes and offers the comfort you once mistook for safety. Caleb had learned enough to know that instinct was not enough. Pain will speak if you do not give it rules. So he sat in his apartment study before sunrise, the black notebook open on the desk, rainwater still shining on the windows, and built the protocol that would govern access from that day forward. Facts can be shared. Feelings must be earned. Pain must be protected until loyalty is proven. Simple. Cold. Necessary. Facts are surface. They explain what happened without opening the room where it still hurts. Someone asks why you left a place. You can say the direction no longer matched your standards. You do not have to explain the disappointment that kept you awake. Someone asks why you no longer speak to a person. You can say the relationship became unhealthy. You do not have to describe the exact sentence that changed how you saw them. Someone asks why you are careful now. You can say experience taught you to be selective. You do not have to hand them the private cost of that experience. This is the first discipline. Give truth without giving the wound. The world does not need your emotional blood work to accept a basic fact. The second discipline is slower. Feelings must be earned. Not by charm. Not by curiosity. Not by someone saying, I am here for you. Words are cheap in comfortable rooms. Feelings are earned by consistency when there is no audience, by restraint when gossip would be easy, by steadiness when you are not useful, by respect when you give less than they wanted. Caleb wrote these tests carefully because he had skipped them before. He had allowed tone to replace evidence. He had allowed warmth to replace history. Never again. A person does not earn your feelings because they ask beautifully. They earn them because they have shown they can hold a smaller truth without turning it into influence. Give them something light and watch what they do with it. Do they keep it private? Do they use it to understand you or to position themselves near you? Do they become entitled to more because they received a little? Do they punish the boundary when the next door stays closed? The third discipline is the deepest. Pain belongs only to proven loyalty, not assumed loyalty, not emotional chemistry, not the strange closeness that appears after one long conversation. Proven loyalty. Caleb defined it without romance and without hope. Loyalty is behavior under pressure. Loyalty is what someone does with your name when you are not present. Loyalty is whether they protect your dignity when reducing you would benefit them. Loyalty is whether they can hear your weakness without needing to own you through it. Until that exists, pain stays private. Not denied. Not buried. Private. There is a difference. Denial pretends the wound is gone. Privacy says the wound is real, but access is restricted. Caleb practiced the protocol that same afternoon when someone approached him after a meeting and asked, with the familiar softness, why he had become so measured lately. The old Caleb would have reached for honesty as proof of innocence. The new Caleb gave a fact. I have learned to be more deliberate. They waited for feeling. He gave none. They leaned closer and said, that sounds like something happened. He saw the door they were trying to open. He did not resent it. Resentment would have made him reactive. He simply protected the next level. A lot of things teach a person timing, he said. That was true. It was also closed. The person smiled a little, but the smile had lost its easy access. Caleb understood then that boundaries are not built by speeches. They are built by repeated refusal to overpay. You do not need to announce that your pain is private. You only need to stop donating it. You do not need to explain your new silence. You only need to live it until the room learns the terms. That evening, he returned to the study and took the old notes, the memories, the private admissions he had once scattered through conversations like loose coins, and placed them inside a small wooden box on the desk. It was symbolic, but symbols matter when they train the mind. He closed the lid, turned the key, and looked into the dark window without avoiding his own reflection. He was not becoming heartless. He was becoming ranked. Courtesy for the public. Context for the reliable. Feeling for the tested. Pain for the loyal. That is how a man keeps his humanity without becoming easy to move. He does not let every open hand reach the deepest room. He does not mistake kindness for qualification. He does not confuse the need to speak with the right to be heard. Pain stays private until loyalty is proven, because the parts of you that hurt the most are also the parts that can move you fastest. The first reaction came quietly, the way social pressure always arrives when it wants to look innocent. Caleb Whitmore had not announced anything. He had not given a speech about boundaries. He had not told anyone he was changing. He simply stopped opening every private door when someone knocked. And within days, people felt it. The same people who once called him honest now called him hard to read. The same people who once praised his openness now said he seemed distant. The same people who benefited from knowing his old wounds now acted confused when he no longer handed them fresh access. That is the part no one prepares you. 4. When you protect your pain, some people will not see maturity. They will see loss. Not your loss. Their loss. They lost the map. They lost the easy route to your reaction. They lost the old version of you who could be softened with concern, opened with patience, and moved with the right sentence at the right time. So they call you cold. They call you guarded. They say you changed as if change itself is a crime. But listen carefully. When people accuse you of changing, they are often mourning the version of you they knew how to use. Caleb saw it during a late afternoon walk through the glass corridor outside the conference rooms, where the city below looked gray and wet under a low winter sky. A colleague stepped beside him and said, "You used to be easier to talk to." The sentence sounded casual, but it had a hook inside it. It invited guilt. It wanted him to explain. It wanted him to prove that he was still kind, still accessible, still the same Caleb who would turn discomfort into confession. The old Caleb would have apologized for the distance. The new Caleb did not. He looked ahead and answered, I am still easy to speak with. I am just more careful about what I carry into conversation. Clean. True. Closed. The colleague smiled, but it was not the same kind of smile. It was the smile people use when a door does not open the way it used to. This is the test. Not whether you can protect your pain when no one challenges you. Anyone can be private in an empty room. The test is whether you can stay private when someone makes your privacy look like betrayal. They will say, I thought you trusted me. They will say, you are acting different. They will say, you do not have to be so closed off. They will make your restraints sound like a wound because they want you to reveal the wound to disprove them. That is the trick. If you defend yourself too much, they get the access back. If you explain why you are guarded, you hand them the story behind the guard. If you rush to prove that you are not cold, you become warm on command. Caleb refused the command. He understood now that not every accusation deserves correction. Some accusations are bait with better manners. Cold, distant, difficult, secretive. These words frighten people who still need approval from every room they enter. But Caleb no longer feared them the same way. A man who cannot survive being called cold will keep paying for warmth with exposure. He will keep opening his wounds to prove he has a heart. He will keep giving emotional evidence to people who have no right to request it. That is not kindness. That is surrender to reputation. Later that evening, Caleb walked past a group gathered near the lobby, their voices low, their faces turning just enough to show they had been discussing him. He did not slow down. He did not look for confirmation. He did not enter the small court of public interpretation. He let them have their guesses. This was new. For most of his life, being misread had felt like danger. Now it felt like weather. Unpleasant sometimes. Temporary. Not sovereign over him. He stepped outside into the rain, collar raised, hands steady, expression unreadable in the reflection of the building glass. The city moved around him, loud and hungry, full of people trying to be known by people who had never proven they could protect anything fragile. Caleb kept walking. Not because he hated them. Hatred is too much attachment. He kept walking because his pain had stopped being a social offering. It was no longer something to display for closeness, trade for comfort, or defend against every careless opinion. The people who deserved depth would earn it slowly. Everyone else would receive distance dressed as courtesy. That is how you remain human without becoming available. You do not close your heart to the world. You close the rooms the world has not earned. And if they call you cold for that, let them. Ice is only frightening to people who were used to walking through your walls. By the final night, Caleb Whitmore understood that protecting pain does not make a man empty. It makes him difficult to move. That is the difference the world tries to hide from you. They tell you that if you do not reveal everything, you are closed. They tell you that if you do not explain every wound, you are hiding. They tell you that if you do not make your private history available, you are afraid of intimacy. But most of these people are not defending intimacy. They are defending access. Caleb stood in his apartment study, the lights low, the rain quiet against the windows, the small wooden box resting on the desk where the black notebook used to sit open. Inside the box were the old notes, the old admissions, the old memories he once scattered into conversations because loneliness had made him careless. He did not hate those memories now. He did not pretend they meant nothing. That would have been another form of weakness. A wound denied still controls from the dark. Caleb did something stronger. He gave the wound a place, but not a public stage. He let it exist without letting it lead. This is the final law. The wound you protect becomes wisdom. The wound you expose to the wrong people becomes a leash. Wisdom does not mean the pain is gone. It means the pain no longer speaks first. It means one careful sentence cannot drag you back into the old role. It means a room full of watchers can test your face and find no easy movement. It means your past exists, but it no longer gives strangers instructions. Caleb looked through the rain-dark glass at the city below, all those lit windows, all those private lives, all those people trying to be known by people who had never proven they could guard what they learn. He had been one of them. He had believed that if he explained the wound clearly enough, someone would finally handle it gently. But power does not come from hoping the wrong people become gentle. Power comes from becoming disciplined enough that the wrong people never receive the wound in the first place. The man who protects his pain does not become inhuman. He becomes selective. He can still love. He can still trust. He can still sit across from someone and speak honestly when the proof is there. But he no longer confuses a soft voice with loyalty. He no longer confuses being heard with being protected. He no longer confuses relief with trust. He lets time reveal character before pain reveals history. And this makes him unsettling to people who prefer quick access. They cannot place him as easily. They cannot pull the old reaction as quickly. They cannot turn his boundary into a confession. They cannot make him explain the private architecture of his mind just because they knocked politely. Caleb took the key to the wooden box and placed it inside the inner pocket of his coat. A small gesture, quiet, almost invisible, but that is how real transformation usually looks. Not loud, not dramatic, not announced to a crowd. Just one man deciding that the deepest parts of him will no longer be available on demand. The next time someone studies his silence, they will not find panic underneath it. The next time someone mentions the old wound, they will not receive the old performance. The next time someone calls him cold for not opening every door, he will let the word fall to the floor and remain standing. Because the goal was never to be understood by everyone. The goal was to stop being controlled by the people who understood too much for the wrong reasons. Caleb turned away from the window, closed the study door, and left the room without looking back. The city still had its games. The watchers still had their questions. The polite collectors still had their patient voices. But Caleb was no longer the same kind of man walking into those rooms. He carried his pain, but it no longer carried him. He had not erased the wound. He had ranked access to it. And in that ranking, he recovered something more valuable than comfort. He recovered command. Remember this when the world asks you to prove your honesty by revealing what still hurts. Your pain is not public evidence. It is private intelligence. Give facts to the curious. Give distance to the entitled. Give courtesy to the crowd. Give depth only to the proven. And give your deepest wound only to the rare person whose loyalty has already protected smaller truths. Because once your pain stops answering for you, you become hard to read. And once you become hard to read, you become hard to control.